Welcome everybody to our half-hour webcast, Identity and Access Management, a map through the Minefield. Just some logistics before we get started. If you do have any questions as we go through the webcast, then please use the panel in the lower right corner of your screen. At the end of the webcast, we will use any remaining time to answer questions, and any questions we do not have time for, we will respond to via email. So to the webcast. There is much debate about this topic, with many projects planned and ongoing, and far too many of those projects have either failed or not returned worthwhile business value. In today's webcast, we explore the identity and access management landscape and discuss ways perhaps to navigate what too often takes on the appearance of a heavily mined field. To introduce ourselves, I am Steve Rooney, and today I am pleased to be joined by my colleague Gonzalo Cuatrecasas. Gonzalo is former head of IT audits at Colgate, Palmolive, and Gonzalo and I both work for Consider Solutions as consulting practice leaders in the area of risk and compliance.
Hello, Steve.
Hi, Gonzalo. Thanks for joining us. Short introduction to Consider Solutions. We provide business solutions and consulting services to help our clients on their journey to a world-class finance operation. And within that context, we focus on three streams: financial control and compliance, risk management and assurance, and finance process optimization. The agenda we have for today, firstly, Gonzalo will take us through the different perspectives depending on what part of the organization you're from. Then we will review the somewhat disturbing state of affairs for IAM projects with a few specific examples. The bumps in the road piece has some interesting anecdotes from an informal survey we conducted. And finally, we share some best practices and thoughts on developing a roadmap that we feel may give a better chance of success. Gonzalo, if you could set the landscape for us.
Absolutely. We thought that to get started would be good to make sure we all talk about the same things in terms of definitions. And as a group, we should agree that identity management centers around the authentication of whom we are transacting with. As in this cartoon, the same way that people could have multiple personalities, they can have multiple IDs. Both the psychologists, as in the case of the cartoon, or the security and risk manager, the goal is to have one identity per person. The new wave of internet and cloud services also create a huge challenge in terms of identification of inbound and outbound information requests. Traditional in-house systems had the network and security perimeter very well defined, but with the introduction of external internet applications combined with ever-increasing mobile points of access raises the bar in terms of how to identify a person that is behind a device. In simple terms, we would like to propose that one of the central issues about identity management focuses on the authenticity of the requester. IAM projects are also about access, managing access. When a person is using an access card to open a door, he or she gets access to what's inside that room, the same way that is true when a person uses a PIN code in a mobile devices to access a banking application or a CSV number in the back of a credit card to pay a trip. In these situations, or these actions, we are actually authorizing entry, but do not authenticate the user. It's also about compliance. IAM projects do need to comply, to take into consideration many regulatory points, as in the US, HIPAA and Sarbanes-Oxley, and now around the world PCI, require that companies have a well thought through authentication and authorization structures to demonstrate mostly accountability and appropriate controls. But it's also about governance, internal governance. We need to make sure that inside the companies we do have appropriate controls, processes well defined, especially around the provisioning. If we bring all this together, identity and access management is a balance between the productivity and the risk management in the scope of a complex compliance structure and delimited by data integrity imperatives. In this map, different stakeholders have different objectives. For instance, audit, they want access log and they want controls to be efficient and effective. They're always looking for accountability. The business, on the other hand, they want, for instance, a sales guy to have access to client product information from a hotel room 24 hours a day, and they're mostly concerned about authorization. The IT folk is really concerned about authentication. For instance, when a business exec is trying to access company data from a mobile device in an airport, they want to know that this request is authentic. Finally, the HR has a more transversal concern, and perhaps the thing that affects them the most is the provision or process. Steve?
Thanks, Gonzalo. So in the context of those perspectives, what is the rationale for an IAM program? There has to be clarity and a consensus on the business goals and the anticipated benefits to the business. If this is not the case, then a serious look needs to be taken at whether you should go forward at this stage with an IAM program. If business return is not clear, then the risk to the program is high. Now, listed here are some of the typical business rationale themes for IAM. If we take the example of data confidentiality, then depending on your business and product, if your product does depend on special proprietary knowledge, then it's essential you have tight control over who is accessing your systems and data. Therefore, that may constitute a very strong business case for IAM. Essentially, make sure you know why you are doing this in business terms. How to do it is secondary to why. Now, within those themes, the join, a move, a leaver process is a common specific scenario. Joiners tends to be the best controlled part of this process, but movers and leavers tends to be where some of the issues occur. So from a mover perspective, many times this is the point where people start to accumulate further access rights while keeping what they already have, when perhaps the existing rights should be removed or curtailed. And with leavers, certainly in our assessment work, we've often seen people who have left the company some time ago still having access rights to access the ERP systems where important financial transactions are executed.
Thank you, Steve. Until now we have explored the main components of IAM, and at this point we would like to take a poll, listen from you. This is an anonymous poll and you can get started immediately. We would like, we thought it would be interesting to know from your point of view who owns IBM and IAM initiatives in your organization. Is it the Chief Operating Officer? Is it the Chief Information Officer? Is it the Chief Financial Officer? Or is the Human Resources folk or perhaps other? We're going to give 20 seconds for you to submit. Make sure you submit, press the submit button. And we're going to count down to 20 seconds now. And 10, and let's see the results.
Hey, well, quite a major results are in the favor of Chief Information Officer here. 100% of attendees are saying that it's the CIO who actually owns these initiatives within your companies. Was expecting it to be the CIO, but not maybe quite as heavily in favor of the CIO as that. But that does bear out the general perception that most IAM programs are today owned by the IT organization. The big question is that where it should be? And by being owned by IT, what is the impact on the program? Here's some food for thought in terms of some stats from an industry survey by the Palmolive Institute. This was taken from over 700 national, multinational and government organizations from people within organization. A series of interesting and somewhat concerning results from this. Summary of the key themes here are users have too much access. We can see 87% believe users have too much access. Changes are not checked, so that many times requests for additional access are not checked. And the pace of change in terms of the different needs from business users is difficult to keep up with, and that results typically in too much access. So somewhat a vicious circle, which leads to an increased risk of inappropriate activities. Now, given that, it's not surprising that if we move on to some other industry perspectives, that the #1 audit concern, as per this 2012 survey from Deloitte, is excessive access rights. And particularly the mover-lever process, again, is a major contributor to this issue. Having those excessive access rights further leads to segregation of duty issues. Another thing to take note of here from the KPMG survey, the main cause of failure for IAM programs is the lack of business buy-in. Too many times, IT are bought in, but not the business. So when it gets challenging, when business-oriented questions are asked, what's the return, what's the impact if we don't do it, can we do it another way? Those are asked partway through the program, and those need to be answered satisfactorily at the outset.
Thank you, Steve. And the analysts are also recognizing that most organizations' approach to IAM is being done the wrong way. That was a study that Gartner pulled out, and it gets it's corroborated by Computer Week as well in another article that highlights this idea of connecting data from IAM systems. They go on and say something like that: by linking up the wealth of data stored in IAM systems with business data, IT can justify investments in IAM by helping create real business benefit through enabling better decisions based on a wide spread of data. Warwick Ashford, that writes for Business Week, emphasizes that point, that IAM projects are becoming a bigger challenge than ever because the computing environments become even more distributed, the enterprises become even more mobile, and we connect with more and more partners, suppliers, and customers. So going on with challenges, or staying with challenges, what are these primary challenges based on our experience with our own projects and with our own clients? The far more, and I'm sure that Steve would agree with me, is that the full-scale IDM projects are normally too big and broad to be taken all at once, right? Also, business issues are not resolved before taking on the project. Job definitions and process definitions, role ownership, role management. Many times we see the same role, it's owned by different people depending on the company code. yet others it's not. So all these role definitions and responsibilities need to be cleared out upfront before we put technology in place. There's also the question about who actually cares about identity access management in the companies. The HR process definitions, if they are actually working the same way that they were designed, many times we find that that's not the case. The complexity of the organizations is often understated, and keeping the lights on sometimes gets in the way of these projects.
Thanks, Gonzalo. Bumps in the road. So we did an informal survey of IAM programs at some large multinational organizations. And here are just a few items, anecdotes, a few real examples of some of the key experiences. Some of the programs were ultimately successful and some were not, but there are valuable lessons to be learned here. First example, large project, the big bang approach was taken. So looking to deliver all as the initial delivery point. But the ownership from a business perspective was never sufficiently established. So it was very much IT driven with a technical methodology behind it. But as the program progressed, it became clear that there was a big gap in understanding of the join and move a lever process. There was an IT understanding, a business understanding, and what was really happening. And in many ways, the technology was being designed in a technically sophisticated way to enforce a process that was not commonly understood. The result was it became very complex and what ended up enforcing a process that was not reality and impeded the process rather than supported it. And after significant investment, the project was shelved. The business were feeling more encumbered rather than enabled. It wasn't clear what the value for them would actually be. Second example, another large multinational company where multiple strategies were active within the organization. A couple were using some package technology and another one homegrown. And there were different priorities for each and essentially different concepts behind each of these strategies. So no clear consolidated business driver behind the programs. Ultimately, they devolved back into smaller local initiatives with somewhat limited success. Third example, so in this case, many pilots were run over a period, and the struggle was finding out what is the business driver. So we had working out what technologies we should use, but a struggle to find the return that could justify the business sponsorship. Now, ultimately, in this case, it was financial controls and an SOD project that provided the platform for identifying the business sponsor. And ultimately, that one's now moving forward within that context, initially with a self-service user access process and portal. So bumps in the road, but those bumps can be navigated. The next example here, example 4, very much financial controls driven project, compliance focused, but driven from the business, ultimately from the CFO. So there's an absolute business need here to know who has access to systems and data. Privacy was paramount. So here there was strong business alignment, a strong compliance stick, enforcement, and senior management commitment. Still a tough project, but ultimately successful, largely due to the total clarity of the business context. Lastly, a good example of a project which started off on one track, again, quite IT driven. We then helped the organization to just refocus that to clarify the business context, This was a very distributed organization, and business controls were essential to manage risk, and that was ultimately recognized. And working directly with the organization management, we were able to gain the necessary understanding and sponsorship. And again, financial controls and SOD became the context for ultimately a successful IDM light approach. Okay, on to a second poll. Again, all responses anonymous, and please select one or more of the answers here. What is the primary challenge your enterprise is looking to overcome through IAM? Is it compliance? Is it provisioning? Is it the reduction of risk related to data loss? Is it to enable business agility? Or is it something else? Again, we'll have 20 seconds. If you could choose one or more and press submit. 5 seconds. And let's take a look at the results. Oops. Oh, interesting. A spread here. Compliance being the main challenge being addressed by those attending. 69% saying compliance is the main driver, followed by 40% on the reduction of risk of data loss. And again, the thing I think to bear in mind here is we've talked about the business buying. The challenge you're addressing has to be something that the business care about.
Very interested indeed, and it fits well with a shift on this presentation now. We're going to start looking at best practice and from this slide, what the big picture would be to make sure that business, IT, HR, and audit considerations are taken into account. And yeah, okay, all right. And we talked about that the business main concern is productivity. They want the authorizations to be right so that they can move on the transactional, on the operational side. We talked also about that the main consideration from IT is data integrity. Authentication is a big issue for them. There is obvious technical concerns about cloud integration, access controls, etc. Audit is always, I guess, there behind the scene, looking at issues of compliance, of risk, certifications as well, and their concern about accountability for in terms of the company. On HR, where provisioning clearly is one of the biggest concerns. All these considerations must be coordinated in symphony with company governance structure, controlled frameworks, and compliance requirements, and more companies are seeing a value in delegating IDM and AM projects in the scope of governance, risk, and compliance departments in such way that they let IT build the technology, business be able to run the solution, HR be a consultative framework behind the scenes, and audit be able to ratify or review the solution afterwards. With this collaborative approach, we could guide the programs in a mosaic style that is breaking down the IAM program into smaller chunks that we can manage, that we can bring into the business, having all the parties scoped within this project. But we should, as indicated earlier, we should make sure that each project have a set of issues resolved up front. Yeah? What problems do we have a mandate to solve? We should answer that question before we start going on a tangent. What is the size of the problem, the size of the risk? What is the business priority? What's the scope in terms of landscape? Technically, how far we're going to go with the centralized, decentralized, or in terms of governance, who's going to own the roles, who's going to do the approvals, the workflow? All these answers, they need to be resolved upfront before we put any technology in place. Finally, with this stackable or mosaic project framework, our experience indicate that the key success factors are very much in terms of deciding who is in the best place to own the project or the program. And as we suggested, perhaps the GRC guys or the controls department might be a good answer. And make sure that, as Steve mentioned before, and I emphasize, that the reasons behind each one of these chunks is aligned towards enabling the business in their objectives. And let's not forget about quick wins, which Steve is going to talk a little more about why this is so important. Steve, over to you.
Okay, so developing your roadmap, how to go about it? What was the main thinking here? Now, we as an organization talk a lot about narrow path approaches, and we definitely advocate a narrow path in this context. And what we mean by that is look to reduce the scope. Look to start off in a more reduced way in terms of limited business units, limited systems, limited processes, before you get into the mainstream. So yes, it's a big initiative with some big goals, but let's start in a fashion where we have the opportunity to validate ideas, validate direction, learn more about what works and what doesn't work without causing any serious accidents in the mainstream day-to-day business. And again, to re-emphasize, solid stakeholder buy-in, essential. Have the big business aligned ideas where you want to go to ultimately, but think in small pragmatic steps. Each step achieving some value, validating the ideas, and from those steps, learn, review, and refine. In terms of an overview of what we recommend, start with an assessment of your current context, working out how IAM is going to help your business, what's the ultimate goal, but then work out what's a realistic first milestone. Now, there may be multiple paths towards that, but keep thinking a time box approach. So we think a 3-month period is good to aim for the initial milestone. So what can we achieve in that 3-month period where we provide some return and we start to validate our ideas. After that first milestone, then review progress and decide what the next milestone should be. So what could be the steps to that first milestone? Essentially, this slide is just showing some typical components, possible steps towards milestone 1. So, for example, the unified model of people and access rights can be a very good start. Knowing what everybody has access to today and can provide immediately the platform for assessing and certifying user access, therefore addressing the #1 audit and compliance concern. So for your first milestone, choose the block or blocks that make sense in the context of what you're looking to achieve from a business value perspective. Define your narrow path, what business units or business unit system we need to look at first. And in parallel to that, identify your possible quick wins. So the quick wins give an easy way to get some return, build enthusiasm and confidence. And here's some examples of what those quick wins may be. Password reset sometimes takes a lot of resource to manage that. If we can make that self-serve, then that can substantially help. And again, the certified user access, knowing what everybody has and having transparency around that can again be a quick win along with some of the other options listed here.
Good stuff, Steve. Thank you very much. Before we wrap up, we wanted to give you some takeaways. IAM and IDM is definitely a business transformation initiative, and it's not always technology-driven, or at least it should not be, and that's our recommendation in our experience. So we'll leave you with some points to validate. The first point is about ownership. We talked quite a bit about ownership. We talked quite a bit of stakeholders. So if you map it in your own organization, you would see you should have a clear map of those before you get engaged in an IDM project. The second is about the business case. You should have a clear, achievable business case behind that, as any other project. Then the processes. We often see that the processes do not work in reality as they were designed, yet the projects, the IDM projects, build on top of definitions instead of reality. So let's see what, how the processes are implemented in the company. Finally, the landscape. We talked quite a bit about the landscape, and let's not forget about the governance. What governance does it exist today in the company, and what governance needs to be revisited or reviewed? Okay, so that's that one. Steve, you had one on your own.
So yeah, last set of takeaways. As Gonzalo says, business context. Make sure you have the business case well defined and the stakeholders there. But also, this is a big undertaking. So don't forget that an incremental approach is just as valid in this kind of program as it is in others. And what that incremental approach enables you to do is to reduce risk and provide opportunity for early return. There will be some mistakes and some lessons to learn along the way. It's best to do those in a limited fashion and have the opportunity to adjust as you go forward. So think in terms of small steps, small pragmatic steps towards the bigger goal. Okay, those are the slides that we had to go through today. We're just going to take one or two questions before we close. Let me see, the first one we have here is related to digital certificates. What role do they play in this context? Gonzalo, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that. I think the digital certificates, clearly they do play a role in the authorization of some transactions, and even on the authentication of some transactions. But it is a tool. It's one tool like many other tools that are in the ecosystem of identity management. And if in the model that we had of a stackable or mosaic-like approach, this would be a perfect example of something that perhaps you can do before or after, but if you do it during the time of the entire implementation, to have it very clear how you manage digital certificates.
Thanks, Gonzalo. We'll just take one more. Let me see. So you talk about a mosaic stackable approach. How do you ensure that all the pieces fit well from a technology standpoint? Good question. Let me take that one. To be honest, there's no perfect answer to this. In terms of technologies, our advice is generally to strike the balance between ensuring you can meet your short-term milestones, as we discussed earlier, whilst keeping an eye on the longer-term objectives. Now, typically a practical approach there is to choose a primary technology vendor who has all or many of the key components. Typically it's not all, but you're looking for something that gives you a good platform, a good foundation, but something that has the flexibility and the architecture to integrate other components as needed, because typically they will be required. And you can, if you have a flexible platform, then you can complement that foundation with other components where needed.
Okay.
We've got some other questions, I believe, and we will respond directly to those via email. For now, that completes the webcast. Thank you all very much for attending. We do hope you found it thought-provoking. If you do wish to discuss anything further or are interested in some help in assessing your IAM program, then please feel free to contact us. Our details are on the screen. But for now, thank you all very much and have a great day.